peut-être commencer. Donc, Lev Grossman, il est né en 1969. Vous avez sans doute vu la série Les Magiciens qui est en train d'être diffusée en France et sur Sci-Fi. C'est adapté de la trilogie qu'il a rédigée, mais il y a 2 autres romans dont on va parler. Et puis son premier métier, c'est d'être journaliste. Et évidemment, de journaliste à écrivain, ça pose plein de questions. Mais avant, et pour commencer, je voudrais revenir peut-être sur votre enfance. Et j'ai lu sur votre site internet que chez vous on lisait et que c'était un monde un peu de livres. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous donner un petit peu l'ambiance, comment ça se passait, quand est-ce que vous avez commencé à dévorer les livres?
This is reminding me vividly of my years of psychoanalysis.
Si vous pouvez vous allonger.
Yes, my parents were both professors of literature. They both taught at universities. My father, to make matters worse, was a poet. So our house was it was a house full of books. I frequently encounter writers who described their upbringing. You know, there was one book in the house. It had no words in it, and if you looked at it, you would be beaten. Our house was not like that. Books were very valued, and reading was very prized. It was understood that reading and writing were, you know, these profoundly important cultural activities. In retrospect, it's almost boringly overdetermined that I ended up becoming a writer.
Quels étaient, jeune homme, un petit peu les livres qui vous ont particulièrement marqué, frappé, en tout cas qui vous ont donné envie d'en lire plus et peut-être d'écrire?
Well, you know, the first book that I ever, the first novel that I ever sort of bonded with in a profound, serious way was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. People read that in France, right? The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Yeah, Narnia, right. That was I can't overstate the importance of that book for me. And it had a family connection. My mother is English, and she grew up in London, and she's old enough that she was in the Blitz in World War II and was transported to the countryside in precisely the same way that the Pevensey children were sent to the countryside. I hasten to add that my mother did not discover a secret magical fairyland in the English countryside, and in fact apparently behaved so badly with her host family that she was transported back to London in order to be bombed by Hitler, which was considered to be an appropriate punishment for whatever she did. She never told me what it was. You know, it very much began with me, for me, with Narnia and C.S. Lewis. I think the funny thing, funny for me, not for my parents, was that I continued to read fantasy even as I grew up. I think my parents expected me to grow out of fantasy, but it was something that I never did. I became a very serious student of literature when I was in college and even in graduate school. And I still credit Virginia Woolf, in particular Mrs. Dalloway, as, you know, the book that woke me up and said, yes, I need to be a writer. But as it turned out, I ended up writing books that were much more like C.S. Lewis than Virginia Woolf.
Donc une vraie appétence pour ce qu'on appelle la littérature de l'imaginaire, la fantasy, la science-fiction. Le premier livre, il est daté de 1997. Est-ce qu'il y a eu d'autres manuscrits avant, d'autres nouvelles? Comment s'est fait le processus jusqu'à la publication?
I was discussing this with Anne Leckie last night, and we were sharing the joys of having been late bloomers as writers. I spent the first part of my career, I glossed over this 20-year period of failure in my career. I spent the first part of my career as a writer trying to write like Virginia Woolf, or failing that, Jonathan Franzen maybe, or Zadie Smith. I wanted to be a literary writer really like my parents. I was trying to kind of prosecute the literary values of my parents, who very much looked down on fantasy and considered it a degraded form of literature. So the book you mentioned, Warp, which came out in 1997, that was the that was the sort of shriveled fruit of my period as a serious writer of literary fiction. It's a book. It's a very short book. It took me 5 years to write. It vanished in about 5 seconds after it was published. It was part of this very, very long, slow period in which I was trying to find my voice as a writer. When I wrote Warp, it really hadn't happened yet. It was a very autobiographical novel about a sensitive young man with a lot of feelings that he had that were very important to him, who sat in his room and thought about himself a lot.
C'est frappant parce que effectivement c'est le seul roman pour l'instant qui n'est pas traduit en français, et en regardant le résumé c'est exactement ça. On a un héros qui ne sait pas véritablement où il en est, ce qu'il va faire de sa vie, et qui rêve à autre chose que la grisaille quotidienne.
I think it's still waiting translation into English from whatever language I wrote it in originally. But it does very much foreshadow a lot of the later themes of my work. The hero is he's obsessed with science fiction, especially Star Trek. He thinks a lot about Star Trek. But it's sort of all in the inside. In his real life, nothing's happening, and he sits around and he drinks and he talks to his friends. There's this weird sort of there's all the stuff going on in his head. Nothing happening in his real life, and it's kind of, for me, sort of waiting for all that stuff that's going on in his head to kind of break out into the real world and start happening. But it hadn't started yet.
Ça s'appelle, pour ceux qui lirent en anglais, ça s'appelle Wrap.
That would have been a better title for it. Warp. It was recently reissued by the publisher, almost 20 years later, and I think it's doing about as well this time as it did last time.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler du second roman qui s'appelle Codex, le manuscrit oublié, qui là est traduit en français chez Calman Levy, et où là c'est toujours un petit peu sur cette mythologie littéraire, puisqu'on va à la recherche d'un manuscrit perdu.
Yes, you know, when Warp was published in 1997, it was not a success. In America, anyway, when you have a novel that is a flop, it's very difficult to get your second book published. All the booksellers keep a database on you, and you've got a black mark next to your name. So it took me 6 years to get my next novel published, and it was called Codex, and it was much more. It was very much influenced by Possession by A.S. Bryant. Also, some of the works of Michael Crichton, I seem to remember, were a major influence on it. It was a kind of bibliographical thriller. I had spent some time working at a rare books library at Yale University, and it was about rare manuscripts. And it was also involved. Sorry, the headset is sort of glitching a little bit. There it is. It was about people looking for a lost medieval manuscript. And while they were doing that, they were playing a lot of video games, which again was an autobiographical element that I mixed into the book, because I too was playing a lot of video games. These two things, the quest for the manuscript and the playing of the video games, become sort of intermingled. I was very interested in video games sort of as a medium, and as a medium that we were witnessing kind of the birth of this new technologically aided activity that a mode of representation that had never existed before. And I got very interested in the parallels between the early days of the book and the early days of the video game. both kind of births of different kinds of media. In the early days of the novel, which was considered to be dangerous and immoral medium, the novel. In some ways, in similar ways to the way people still look at video games now.
Est-ce que ça fait partie aussi de quelque part d'une recherche ou d'une mythologie personnelle pour le livre?
I think there's definitely a theme. There's a theme there, which I'm looking for a less crude word than escapism, but I think I was very preoccupied with a sense of the emptiness of the world, the difficulty of finding meaning in the world, the sort of chaotic nature of the world. I would read stories, narratives, and they seemed so well organized. All the details seemed wonderfully put in their place. Everything had a meaning that attached very easily to it. And at the end, a resolution was found that was satisfying. Or if it wasn't found, then there was a wonderful sense of melancholy and sadness. And then in real life, it was nothing like that at all. I felt very lost in my life personally, and very much struggling to find a path. One of the earliest and sort of most powerful and influential moments for me was seeing in my literary life was seeing a production of Waiting for Godot, which I saw I was probably 15, and I had this enormous moment of recognition, like, this guy's telling the truth. Everyone's been lying to me except for that guy, Samuel Beckett, and it's never really left me. And some of that sense of emptiness and futility pushes into it was pushing into my writing even then, and sort of was in contrast to what seemed like a powerfully meaningful world that existed in fiction, and this continuity between the two became a real preoccupation for me, and which continued into The Magicians.